Hey everybody, it's David Sirota. So one question in American politics is, why do incumbents so often win re-election? I mean, why when people are so dissatisfied with government, when polls show people are not happy with Congress and their elected officials, why do incumbents almost always win re-election? Well, one answer that campaign finance reformers have suggested is that incumbents are able to grossly outspend typically their challengers. That incumbents who are in office, making policy in office, are able to leverage their office to raise huge amounts of money and outspend their challengers when they run for re-election. There has been a push in some circles to try to limit campaign spending, to try to equalize the playing field. And opponents of that have said that won't really change much of anything. But a new study out that we reported on at International Business Times actually suggests the opposite. It suggests that actually campaign spending limits do a lot to help create competitive elections and preserve democracy. This was a story from my colleague Lydia O'Neill, who I work with at IBT, and she reported on this study, and I want to read you some stats that the study found. She found that this is from data out of Brazil. It found that there was a 25% drop in limits on campaign spending. A 25% drop in limits in campaign spending led to a 9% rise in the number of individuals running for office, as well as a 40% decrease in the average candidate's wealth. Now here's the other stat. Incumbents, when there were tough campaign spending limits, incumbents were 11% less likely to be reelected, which was a pretty sizable effect. So basically what this study seems to be suggesting is when you limit the amount, the total amount that candidates can spend on their election campaigns, and you effectively equalize the amount. You say, the challenger and the incumbent can only spend this much and they can't spend any more. When you do that, guess what? The elections become a lot more competitive. Incumbents don't have as much of an advantage as they typically have. So this data seems to add credence to the arguments that campaign finance reformers have put forward. I mean, campaign finance reform advocates in the United States have put forward in past decades a public financing system for presidential candidates, which you would under that old system, which has kind of gone out of date, but the candidates would agree to accept public financing for their campaigns in exchange for not being able to spend any more than they were given. This seems to add credence that those campaign spending limits actually really help create competitive elections. And look, we've seen campaign spending limits in other industrialized countries. And those in other industrialized countries tend to have pretty competitive elections. Democratic countries with pretty competitive elections on a more fair playing field. At least that's what the campaign finance advocates would argue, a more fair playing field than what you see in the United States, where incumbents can run for office and oftentimes outspend their opponents, 4-1, 5-1, 6-1, and the like. I mean, as that incumbent spending advantage has existed and actually grown in many cases bigger under Citizens United, where there's a more unlimited campaign cash coming in. As all that's happened, the lack of competitive elections in America has become a hallmark of American politics. I mean, you got an incumbent re-election rate above 90% in a country where polls show people are dissatisfied with their political leadership. That disconnect, the disconnect between the dissatisfaction with the political leadership and yet this re-election rate, the 90+% re-election rate among incumbents, suggests that there's some other factor. And the argument has been that the other factor is that monetary advantage. Now, granted, this study comes out of Brazil. It's not the United States. It's a totally different country. But here we have a very concrete example of where campaign spending limits appear to be making a real difference in a country's electoral system. Now, will that add credence to it at a level where such campaign finance spending limits will be put in place in the United States? Well, that's harder to say. There has been an effort, as I suggested before, to reduce limits on campaign donations. There has been an effort to undermine public financing election systems in places like Arizona. And part of that is because the people who are in office are the masters of the existing campaign spending system. That's in part where the resistance to a proposal like campaign spending limits comes from. Remember, the people who are making the policy, the people who get elected, they are the masters of the existing system, which means that they may not necessarily be all that supportive of changing the system they have mastered.